Hey, everybody.
Hey,
Hey
Hi.
guys,
Dang, did you see Curry last night?
Yeah, he's so cute and he's a really good shooter. He's probably one of the best in the NBA right now.
he is lethal anywhere on the court, and it's literally so effortless.
he's honestly so underrated as a player because of his size, even though he's 6'3".
Crazy how good he is. But I heard in high school he had to make some changes in his shot. Otherwise, he would have never gotten this far.
No way. What, really?
Yeah, he trains really hard and his dad was a good NBA shooter. It has to be natural for him.
I wonder what he changed.
I mean, he had to do something. The players in college are bigger, taller, faster, and stronger.
From the interview I saw with Curry, he said he had to change his shooting height and angle and get stronger personally.
How does a change in shooting height, angle, personal strength make him a better shooter?
I know, right? How does that make a difference?
Think biomechanics.
Think what?
Think biomechanics.
Biomechanics?
Yeah, biomechanics, right? I mean, we did talk about projectile motion as well as impulse.
Come on, you're all kinesiology majors. Think biomechanics.
Yeah,
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 Biomechanics.
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 Going back to high school, the summer between your freshman and sophomore years of high school, you and your father just completely overhaul your shot. Why did he suggest doing it?
I was a short kid in high school, played JV my freshman year, and you notice how the change in physicality from JV to varsity, and my shot was kind of a fling from my hip kind of a deal, and we kind of were talking about it and thinking, you got to get that shot off you're a lot quicker on the varsity level with taller guys and, better defenders and guys that can maybe block your shot. And so me being a short kid, trying to get my release a little higher so that I'd have more of an advantage when I was out there on the floor. And it was a frustrating summer, to say the least. I couldn't leave the paint for a good month.
From that interview, we can see that Curry had a few goals to reach if he wanted to continue with basketball and compete at higher levels. He wanted to develop a quicker release time, increase release height, and ultimately develop more strength. In order to understand what Curry did to help him reach his goals, we can look at a concept within biomechanics called impulse. Some of you may be thinking, what is that? Well, we are not talking about that feeling you get when the fresh new pairs of shoes come out. The impulse that we are talking about is a force applied over a period of time, and it's written as impulse equals force times time. So some background information here. A force on an object results in motion of the object, assuming that the force is large enough. Forces occur over a period of time, not in an instant. Therefore, these forces are technically called impulses. For example, if Curry or any other person was shooting, throwing, kicking an object like a ball, he or she would be applying impulses to the object in order to propel the ball in the desired direction. Now let's look at this concept, impulse, to Curry's shot form when he was younger compared to now. We are focusing on form and the time till the ball is released. So right now they are both getting ready to start their shooting motion. Notice that in the same amount of time it took young Curry to position the ball at his chest, older Curry has the ball at his forehead and his feet have left the floor. Because the ball traveled a further distance to get to his forehead in the same amount of time, this shows that there is a decrease in time to position the ball before release, meaning that he got faster at positioning the ball. This also shows that there was more force production, which ultimately leads to a greater impulse being placed on the ball. So on the right here, older Curry has just released the ball, and this is his release time, or the time that force was applied to the ball. And here is young Curry's longer release time, and although it is still fairly quick, he had to compensate for his lack of strength and shooting height in order to generate the impulse needed to shoot from that distance. And we'll talk about that. With Curry, it really comes down to changing impulse. A further distance from the basket requires a larger impulse, and there are various ways to produce that impulse, as seen by young and old Curry's shooting mechanics. Young Curry did not have the strength to shoot from his forehead, so he compensated by shooting from his chest, which utilizes a larger group of muscles called the pectoralis muscles. In addition to that compensation, it also looked like he used both hands while shooting, and he jumped more horizontally towards the basket, which helped to produce that impulse he needed to shoot from that distance. Curry improved by making neuromuscular changes. Now remember, in order to make positive changes to our muscles and nervous system, it takes a great deal of time and effort. Curry said himself that he couldn't even leave the paint for a month with his new shooting form, because he had to work hard at the skill to develop the strength that he needed. So he had to deliberately practice his shooting form and increase his force generation ability. So he had to get stronger, possibly by resistance training, and also by practicing that new form that he was working on. This also helped with his motor coordination, which adds to the increase in force production. So all these ways of improving work to increase force generation ability and the efficiency of his movement, which will translate to greater impulses out there on the court.
In order to talk about Curry's amazing shot, we have to talk about projectiles and their motion. So what is a projectile? A projectile is anything that can be flung, launched, shot, kicked, thrown, or otherwise put into flight. So there's many different examples in sports. We can think of things like the basketball that Curry shoots, a hockey puck, a javelin, frisbee, golf ball, anything again that's put into flight. People are even projectiles. Curry makes a jump shot, he's a projectile. He goes into flight. Same thing for divers. If we think about competitive divers who do all those flips and twists in the air, those are projectiles as well. In considering projectiles and their motion, we have to consider several different factors that influence them. For instance, the shape of the projectile, along with any spin or rotation that's put on it, greatly affects the flight of the projectile. If we think of a baseball pitcher throwing a curve ball, the rotation or spin that's put on the ball causes it to curve in its flight. Gravity, always a constant here on Earth. Our gravity is 9.81 meters per second squared. And so it's always acting on the projectile, bringing it back down to Earth. Air resistance is another factor, such as wind speed or eddies. If you think have ever been on an airplane and you hit a little bump in turbulence, that's due to the ambient air around the plane. When a projectile is put into flight, we have to consider its height. Is the projectile being launched from a position that's higher or lower than the target, or maybe at its same level? Also, what angle is the projectile taking off from? Greatly influences its flight pattern, as well as the velocity. Velocity, there's a horizontal and a vertical component. That's what gives it a parabolic flight when we consider gravity. And lastly, we have to consider impulse. An impulse is basically the momentum that's put into the object as it's released. So now that we've talked a little bit about projectile motion, let's take a look at the simulator. What's really cool about the simulator is that we can adjust a lot of different variables that would affect projectile flight. However, in this case, we're going to keep a lot of things constant. So that way we can focus solely on what happens when we change projectile height as well as projectile angle. So here we've selected a football, as this gives us the most accurate variables to change as far as mass and diameter of our object. Here we have the mass set at 0.59 kilograms, which is the standard weight of an NBA basketball, as well as the standard diameter for an NBA basketball at 0.24 meters. Gravity is held constant at 9.81 meters per second, as it is here on Earth, and we have no air resistance. Typically, an NBA game is played indoors, and therefore they're going to have very, very little influence of air on the flight of their projectile. So let's take a look at what happens when we keep everything constant, including the angle. We'll set that to 45 degrees, as well as the speed. And what happens when our projection height is 0 meters. Let's see how far the projectile goes. So as we can see, with 45 degrees, we get this nice parabolic shape, and our projectile goes about 23 meters. So what happens when we increase this to, let's go 2 meters? And while we've increased the projectile height to 2 meters, our target stays the same. And this creates a very interesting situation. The ball flies further. As we can see that it went almost 1.8 meters further than the first ball. And the reason for this is because our target height stayed the same. And as our projection height increases with the target height staying the same, the ball is allowed to fly further and gets a greater flight time, and will have a further range. Let's see if this is confirmed if we raise this up to 4 meters. Again, very nice parabolic shape, very similar to the other two, and that's because the angle of takeoff has been the same. The one difference is as the height increases and our target height stays the same, we get a longer flight time, and therefore our projectile will go further. So let's erase all this and take a look at what happens when we change the angle but keep the height the same. So we'll lower this back down to 0 meters. And let's drop this down to 25 degrees, the lowest angle setting that we can create in the simulator. Let's launch that projectile with keeping everything the same. As you can see, our parabolic shape is very, very kind of flat, and the projectile only went about 17.6 meters. Now let's see what happens when we bring that back up to that 45-degree angle. Interesting. So the ball went further, and we get this greater apex, this greater height in the projectile flight. So let's add another 20 degrees and go from 45 to 65. Interesting. So at 65, we get this really high apex, this nice high flight. But as the projectile returns back down to Earth, it hits at the same distance as the 25-degree angle. Now, this is really interesting and requires a little bit more math than we're going to go into today to explain. But 25 degrees and 65 degrees have a relative distance that is equal from both their vertical and horizontal components. And therefore, a very special situation happens between those two angles. When everything's held constant, the projectile will go the same distance. Why do we care about projectile angle? Well, projectile angle is really, really important when we consider the target size of the NBA basketball. So if we take and consider this target to be the hoop, it's flat. It sits perfectly parallel to the horizontal plane. And therefore, the ball needs to enter at a certain angle. If it's too shallow, it might not go in. You might hit the front of the rim or the back of the rim. And the higher it goes and enters with a more vertical component, actually there's an increase in target size. And we'll actually see that in a minute. And it makes a lot of sense if we think, I got to shoot over this defender. Does it make sense to have a more shallow shot, which actually decreases the size of the target? Or should we have this higher arcing shot, which will actually increase the size of the target because of its vertical component? We'll see that here shortly. As mentioned in the simulator, projection angle and relative target size are an interesting factor in the game of basketball. In the game of basketball, the basketball hoop is in the horizontal plane, and therefore the target is flat. The shooter must shoot the ball so that way it comes through at a vertical angle. In the NBA, the rim diameter is double the size of the basketball diameter. So when the ball is dropped perfectly perpendicular at a 90-degree angle to the target from the center, it falls right through, giving you a swoosh. Now, if your shooter is 100% accurate at the center of the hoop with a 60-degree angle, we see a major decrease in the diameter of the hoop in the front and the back, which means that there's an increased margin for error. We find that there's a critical angle, 32.43 degrees. When the ball is shot at this angle, it needs to be 100% perfect for it to go through, and it's probably going to skim the front or the back rim. Anything less than 32.43 degrees is almost guaranteeing to hit front or back rim. And at 20 degrees, you're guaranteed to miss. So when we think about Curry's shot and that high arc, he's actually giving himself a bigger target. It'd be great if we could get to this 90-degree angle, but that's almost impossible. But one important thing to keep in mind is that anything shot above 32.43 degrees, you're actually going to be giving yourself a greater chance at making a basket with a missed shot.
Let's see if what we talked about in the simulator holds true when we're looking at projection angle, arc, and height. We'll shoot from the free throw line here, but as you can see, I'm already setting up for maximizing projection height, and we'll see variation in angle as well as arc. We can see, as I attempted to try to make a normal shot, at 49.5 degrees, we still don't have a very great apex, and this is a large part due to the fact that we have a negative projection angle, meaning that our target is higher than our release angle, which is typical in basketball. Players will jump in order to try to gain more height, which would eventually lead to a more leveling of the target field, increasing their range when shot at similar angles. With this shot, I'm still shooting from the free throw line, but I tried to increase my angle and get a much higher arc, as we can see with the purple line. We can also see the green circle, which was my normal projection height when I was shooting with my more normal shot. We still made the basket, but remember what we said about that target. The target size will increase as the vertical angle increases as well and becomes closer to 90 degrees. In this shot, we have 61.5 degree shooting angle, and we get a much higher arc. The range is the same, but that's because we had to change the velocity. as we draw closer to the critical angle, we can see that I have a much flatter arc. The basketball still went in, but it took me several shots to try to get this. Now, as that arc gets lower and lower and lower, while the projection height stays the same, we run the risk of hitting the front part of the rim. If we add more velocity, we run the risk of hitting the back part of the rim, or even the back board. So we can truly see that there is an advantage to having a higher arcing shot and moving away from that critical angle more towards a 90-degree angle, which would give us a true target size, as well as increase our chance of making if we're slightly off on that shot.
So, as we can see, through kinesiology, and in particular biomechanics, we can appreciate the benefits that Stephen Curry achieved by revamping his shot in high school. In particular, we can see that through his change in projection height, where the old Curry used to quote unquote fling from the hip, to the current Curry, where he's shooting from the forehead. This paired with a high arc caused by a greater release angle actually increases the relative size of the target that Curry's shooting at. Now, that's not to take anything away from Curry. He's an amazing tactician, works really hard, and is highly accurate. But I think we can all agree a bigger target is always nice to have.
Yeah, definitely. And looking at his shot today, from the old footage, you can tell that his shot changed a lot. But that was made possible by him developing the ability to produce a greater impulse. So thinking back to the older footage of Curry shooting, if we were to tell him at his young age to shoot from his forehead with a high arc and from the three-point line, there's a high chance that he would have airballed that shot because of his lack of strength to produce the impulse needed for that projection angle. So now, current Curry definitely has the strength needed, and that shows through how quick he shoots from far distances and with a high arc to that shot. So with this information we presented, you could actually go out and analyze your own shot. Maybe take a video of yourself, and you can look to see if your arc is high or flat, if you release closer to your chest or to your forehead, and what's really important is to see if your form changes as you shoot from further distances, because that could give you some insight to where some opportunities of improvement are, and you could increase your chances of becoming a greater shooter.
Pretty cool. What a little bit of research, kinesiology background, in particular with biomechanics, and utilizing tools such as Dartfish, we can really develop a great understanding of human movement as well as performance enhancement. Thank you.
Yeah, I had no idea that he trained so much.
For real, I just thought it was natural talent.
Yeah, it's interesting how much we can learn from biomechanics.
Right? It's cool and crazy how the combination of impulse and projectile motion plays so much into shooting ability in basketball.